I should have known something was wrong the moment Brandon chose Le Bernardin for my birthday dinner. My husband never spent that kind of money on me, not unless he had an audience to impress. 20 people filled the private dining room. His mother, Patricia, sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, her diamond necklace catching the candlelight. James Whitmore and his wife occupied the seats of honor beside her. The rest were Brandon's college friends, business partners, and their perfectly polished wives, all people who had never bothered to learn my name in 4 years of marriage. Elena works at some little accounting firm downtown, Brandon was saying, his voice carrying that tone I'd grown to hate. Nothing too important, just basic number crunching. I smiled and nodded, cutting my salmon into small pieces. Let them think I was simple. Let them think I was small. How quaint, Patricia said, her lips barely moving. I suppose everyone needs hobbies. The table erupted in polite laughter. I took a sip of wine and watched Brandon's face light up with their approval. He lived for moments like this. Moments where he could feel superior. Actually, James said, leaning back in his chair, I heard your little company lost the Morrison account last month. Tough break. I felt 20 pairs of eyes turn toward me, waiting for my reaction. Brandon's smile faltered for just a second before he recovered. Well, he said, his voice getting louder, Elena's not exactly management material. She's more of a support role kind of person. Support role? Patricia's eyebrow arched. How generous of you to keep her employed, Brandon. The laughter was sharper this time, meaner. I set down my fork and folded my hands in my lap, keeping my expression neutral. Inside, I was counting, cataloging, remembering every face, every laugh, every cruel word. You know what the problem is? Brandon stood up, his wine glass in hand. The room fell silent. Some people just don't understand their place in the world. He was looking directly at me now, his eyes bright with alcohol and malice. Some people think they're more important than they actually are. They think they deserve things they haven't earned. His voice was getting louder, more aggressive. They think they can sit at tables like this and pretend they belong. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears, but I kept my face perfectly calm. This was it. This was the moment I'd been preparing for without even knowing it. Brandon, I said quietly, maybe you should sit down. Maybe you should shut up, he snapped. The entire table gasped. You're embarrassing yourself, Elena. You're embarrassing me. You're a disgrace. The word hung in the air like poison. A disgrace. In front of 20 people. On my birthday. Brandon's friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even Patricia looked shocked by his cruelty. But Brandon wasn't done. You know what? I'm tired of pretending. He threw his napkin on the table. I'm tired of acting like you're anything more than a charity case I picked up because I felt sorry for you. He leaned down close to my ear, his breath hot against my skin. You're nothing without me, he hissed. Nothing. Then he straightened up, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. Enjoy your birthday dinner, sweetheart. The bill's all yours. The silence that followed was deafening. 20 faces stared at me with a mixture of pity, embarrassment, and cruel curiosity. They wanted to see me break. They wanted to see me cry or beg or run after him. Instead, I smiled. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet, sliding out a black American Express card that caught the light like obsidian. The waiter appeared instantly, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of the card. The full bill, please, I said calmly, and add a 20% tip. As I signed the receipt, a bill that totaled more than most people made in a month, I looked up at the stunned faces around the table. Thank you all for coming, I said, standing gracefully. This has been educational. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, leaving behind a room full of people who had no idea what they'd just witnessed. They thought they'd seen Brandon destroy his wife. They had no idea they'd just watched me set myself free. 5 years ago, I was a different person. Or maybe I was exactly the same person, just wearing a different mask. I remember the day I met Brandon like it was yesterday. I was 27, working as a junior financial analyst at Henderson Associates, deliberately keeping my head down and my real capabilities hidden. The small apartment I rented in Queens was a far cry from the penthouse I could have afforded, but it served my purpose perfectly. You see, I'd learned early that people underestimate you when they think you're struggling. And when people underestimate you, they show you who they really are. Brandon walked into our office that Tuesday morning wearing a suit that cost more than most people's rent. He was there for a consultation about his family's investment portfolio, the kind of routine meeting that usually went to senior partners. But Mr. Henderson was sick, and somehow the appointment landed on my desk. "You're handling the coal account?" Brandon asked, looking me up and down with barely concealed disappointment. I was expecting someone more experienced. I smiled sweetly and pulled out his file. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Cole. Let me show you what I've prepared." For the next hour, I walked him through a comprehensive analysis of his family's holdings. I'd done my homework, not just on their investments, but on Brandon himself. I knew about his expensive habits, his mediocre performance at his family's company, and his reputation for burning through trust fund money. But I also knew something else, something that would prove useful later. "This is actually quite impressive," he admitted, though he looked surprised to be saying it. "You really understand the market." "I try my best," I said, playing the humble card perfectly. That's how it started. Brandon began requesting me specifically for his family's account. Then he started asking me to lunch, then dinner. He was charming when he wanted to be, and I let myself be charmed. Or at least, I let him think I was. "You're different from other girls," he told me on our third date, cutting into his steak at some overpriced restaurant. "You're not just after my money." I almost laughed. If only he knew that I had more money than he did, carefully hidden in offshore accounts and shell companies I'd been building since college. My parents had died when I was 19, leaving me with nothing but debt and determination. I'd worked 3 jobs while getting my finance degree, and I'd been investing every spare penny since I was 21. By the time I met Brandon, I was already worth more than $2 million. But he saw what I wanted him to see, a hard-working girl from a poor background who was grateful for his attention. "I've never met anyone like you," I told him, and it was true. I'd never met anyone so completely blind to what was right in front of them. Our relationship moved fast. Brandon loved having a girlfriend who seemed impressed by his lifestyle, who gasped at the right moments when he showed off his family's wealth. I played the part perfectly, the girl who'd never seen such luxury, who was overwhelmed by his generosity. Meanwhile, I was quietly building my empire. I started my own investment firm under a different name, using a web of LLCs and partnerships that would have impressed the most experienced lawyers. I was making money faster than I could spend it, but Brandon never suspected a thing. He proposed after 18 months, presenting me with a ring that cost less than I made in a week. But I cried tears of joy and told him it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "You'll never have to worry about money again," he promised, slipping the ring onto my finger. "I'll take care of everything." I nodded and smiled, already knowing that I'd been taking care of myself just fine.
The wedding was everything Brandon wanted, expensive, showy, designed to impress his friends and family. I played the grateful bride, overwhelmed by his family's generosity. Patricia made it clear from day one that she thought her son was marrying beneath him, but I just smiled and thanked her for welcoming me into the family. For 4 years, I perfected my performance. The submissive wife who was lucky to have landed such a successful husband, the woman who needed his guidance, his protection, his money. All while I was secretly funding the very business that made him feel so superior. But every performance has to end eventually, and mine was about to reach its final act.
The house felt different when I walked through the front door that night. The same marble floors, the same expensive furniture that Brandon loved to show off to visitors, but everything had shifted. The balance of power had finally tipped, and he didn't even know it yet. I could hear him upstairs, probably on the phone with James, celebrating his public humiliation of his wife. Let him enjoy it. It would be his last moment of feeling superior. I kicked off my heels and walked to my home office. The small room Brandon had grudgingly given me, thinking I used it to pay household bills and manage our simple finances. If only he knew what really happened behind that locked door. I opened my laptop and logged into my secure server. 17 different investment accounts appeared on my screen, each one representing a different piece of my carefully constructed financial empire. The numbers still amazed me sometimes. $12.7 million, spread across real estate, stocks, bonds, and private equity investments. But tonight wasn't about admiring my wealth. Tonight was about using it. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed the first number. Thompson speaking. It's Elena. We need to talk. Mr. Thompson had been my mentor since my early days at Henderson Associates. He was the only person who knew the full extent of my hidden empire, and he'd helped me build the network of shell companies that kept my identity secret from Brandon. I saw the news about Coal Industries losing the Meridian contract, he said. Quite a coincidence. No coincidence at all, I replied. How quickly can we move on the rest? The Hartwell Group is ready to pull out tomorrow morning. Sterling Dynamics will follow by noon. That should trigger the clause in their credit agreement. I smiled, remembering how carefully I'd studied that credit agreement 2 years ago. Brandon's family company was leveraged to the hilt, and losing 3 major clients in one day would put them in immediate breach of their loan terms. And the other matter? Detective Rivera has everything he needs: the financial records you've been collecting, the recorded conversations, the evidence of the offshore accounts. He's just waiting for your signal. Carlos Rivera and I had grown up on the same street in Queens. While I was building my fortune, he was building his career in the NYPD's Financial Crimes Division. When I'd started documenting Brandon's illegal activities, Carlos was the obvious choice to help me build a case. Give me 48 hours, I said. I want to see how desperate he gets first. My second call was to my real estate agent. The penthouse is ready? I asked. Signed, sealed, and waiting for you. The movers can have your things out of the house by tomorrow afternoon if you give the word. I'd bought the penthouse 6 months ago, using one of my shell companies. Brandon had no idea that his wife owned a $3 million apartment overlooking Central Park. He thought I was completely dependent on him for shelter. The third call was the most satisfying. Meridian Holdings, this is Patricia. Mrs. Cole, this is Elena Martinez from Apex Financial Solutions. I used my maiden name and the company I'd created specifically for this moment. I'm calling about your son's behavior at dinner tonight. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, who is this? I represent several of your major clients, Mrs. Cole. Word travels fast in our circles, and Brandon's public display tonight has raised some serious concerns about his judgment and professionalism. I don't understand. Your family's company depends on maintaining relationships with high net worth individuals. When your son publicly humiliates his wife at an upscale restaurant, it reflects poorly on your family's values and business practices. I could hear her breathing getting faster. Are you threatening us? I'm informing you that Hartwell Group, Sterling Dynamics, and Morrison Industries have all expressed concerns about continuing their relationships with Coal Industries. They value discretion and respect, qualities your son clearly lacks. The line went quiet for a full 30 seconds. What do you want? She finally whispered. Nothing from you, Mrs. Cole. This call is simply a courtesy. Good evening. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, watching the city lights twinkle through my window. By now, Patricia was probably calling Brandon in a panic. He'd spend the night trying to figure out who was behind the sudden exodus of clients, never suspecting that his nothing wife was orchestrating his downfall from the room right below his feet. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 100 missed calls and counting. The fun is just beginning. CR. Carlos was right. The fun was just beginning. But for Brandon, the nightmare had already started. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing like an angry wasp against my nightstand. The display showed 97 missed calls, and as I watched, it ticked up to 98, then 99. 100. I smiled and set the phone aside without checking a single message. Let him panic. Brandon's side of the bed was empty and unmade. I could hear him downstairs, his voice echoing through the house as he paced and shouted into his phone. Even from the second floor, I could make out fragments of his conversation. What do you mean they're pulling the contract? We've worked with Hartwell for 8 years. I stretched lazily and padded to the bathroom, taking my time with my morning routine. There was no rush today. I had nowhere to be except exactly where I was, watching Brandon's world crumble from the front row. By the time I made it downstairs, he was on his 4th phone call of the morning. His hair was disheveled, his expensive pajamas wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that told me he hadn't slept at all. "Elena!" He practically lunged at me when he saw me enter the kitchen. "Thank God. I've been trying to call you all night." "I turned my phone off," I said calmly, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "I needed some peace after last night." His face flushed red. "Look, about last night, I may have gotten a little carried away. The wine, you know how it is. But we have bigger problems right now." I raised an eyebrow and took a sip of my coffee. "We?" "The company is in crisis. 3 major clients pulled out overnight. 3. And they're all saying the same thing. Something about concerns over our family values and professional conduct." He ran his hands through his hair. "I think someone is targeting us." "How terrible," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. "You don't understand. These contracts were worth $15 million annually. Without them, we're looking at potential bankruptcy. The bank is already calling about our credit agreements." My phone rang. Brandon's eyes lit up with desperate hope. "Answer it. Maybe it's one of the clients calling back." I glanced at the screen. It was Carlos, right on schedule. "Hello?" "Elena, it's Carlos Rivera. We need to meet today. There's been a development in the case we discussed." Brandon was watching me intently, trying to read my expression. "What kind of development?" I asked. "The kind that requires immediate action. Can you meet me at the usual place in an hour?" "Of course, I'll be there." I hung up and turned to find Brandon staring at me with confusion. Who was that? "A friend from my old neighborhood. He's having some personal problems and needs advice." "Personal problems? Elena, I just told you our entire livelihood is at stake, and you're worried about some friend's personal drama?" I set down my coffee cup and looked at him directly for the first time that morning. "Our livelihood, Brandon? I wasn't aware I had any stake in your family's company." "Of course you do. You're my wife. What affects me affects you." "Funny. Last night you made it very clear that I was nothing, that I didn't belong at your table, with your friends, in your world." I picked up my purse. "I'm going out." "Elena, wait." He grabbed my arm. "I'm sorry about last night, okay? I was drunk and stupid. But I need you right now. I need your support." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "Let go of me, Brandon." Something in my tone made him release me immediately. "Where are you going?" "To help my friend with his personal problems. Some people actually value loyalty and respect." I left him standing in the kitchen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The drive to meet Carlos gave me time to think. By now, Patricia would have told Brandon about the mysterious phone call from Apex Financial Solutions. He'd be scrambling to figure out who was behind the coordinated attack on his family's business. He'd never suspect that the answer was sleeping in the bed next to him every night. Carlos was waiting for me at our usual spot, a small cafe in Queens where we'd met as teenagers. He looked up from his coffee as I approached, his expression serious. "It's time," he said simply. "I know." I sat down across from him. "How long do we have?" "The warrant will be ready by tomorrow morning. After that, everything moves fast." I nodded. "Then tonight is his last night of freedom." "Are you ready for this, Elena? Once we start, there's no going back." I thought about Brandon's face when he called me a disgrace, about 4 years of condescension and cruelty, about the way his friends had laughed at my expense. I've been ready for this my whole life. I returned home to find Brandon's car in the driveway next to a familiar black Mercedes. Patricia was here. This was going to be interesting. I could hear their voices before I even opened the front door, Patricia's sharp, commanding tone cutting through Brandon's panicked rambling. They were in the living room, and from the sound of it, the conversation wasn't going well. "Completely irresponsible. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" "Mother, I told you, I don't know how this happened." Someone is orchestrating this, but I can't figure out who. I walked into the room, and both of them turned to stare at me. Patricia's face was flushed with anger, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled. Brandon looked like he'd aged 5 years since morning. "Elena," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How lovely to see you." "Mrs. Cole." I set my purse down and took a seat across from them. "You seem upset." "Upset?" Patricia's composure cracked. "Our family business is being systematically destroyed, and you're concerned about whether I'm upset?" Brandon shot his mother a warning look. "What mother means is that we're all under a lot of stress right now. I can imagine." I crossed my legs and settled back in my chair. Losing 3 major clients in one day must be devastating. 4, Brandon corrected miserably. "Morrison Industries just called. They're terminating their contract effective immediately." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Carlos had moved faster than expected. "That's terrible," I said. "What reason did they give?" "The same as the others. Concerns about our family's values and professional conduct." Brandon's voice was bitter. "Someone is feeding them information, Elena. Someone who was at that dinner last night." Patricia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Speaking of last night, I received a very interesting phone call. Someone claiming to represent our clients, making threats about Brandon's behavior." "What kind of threats?" I asked innocently. "The caller knew details about our business relationships that should have been confidential. They mentioned Brandon's outburst at the restaurant." I shrugged. "Word travels fast in wealthy circles. You said so yourself. 20 people witnessed what happened." "This wasn't gossip," Patricia snapped. "This was someone with real power, real connections, someone who could actually influence our clients." Brandon was staring at me now, something shifting in his expression. "Elena, you work in finance. You understand these kinds of business relationships. Have you heard anything? Any rumors or talk about our company?" "I work at a small accounting firm, Brandon. Remember? You made that very clear last night." I kept my voice level, but I let just a hint of hurt creep in. "I'm just a support person, nothing too important." His face flushed with shame. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." I stood up. "You meant every word. Just like you meant it when you called me a disgrace, when you said I was nothing without you." Patricia cleared her throat. "Perhaps we could focus on the current crisis rather than relitigating last night's misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I turned to face her. "Your son publicly humiliated me on my birthday and left me to pay for 20 people's dinner. What part of that was misunderstood?" "Elena, please," Brandon said desperately. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but right now I need your help. We need to figure out who's behind this attack on our family." "Your family," I corrected. "You made it very clear that I don't belong." The room fell silent. Patricia and Brandon exchanged glances, and I could see the wheels turning in their heads. They were starting to realize that their usual tactics, intimidation, condescension, emotional manipulation, weren't working on me anymore. "What do you want?" Patricia asked finally. "Excuse me?" "What do you want from us? An apology? Money? What will it take for you to help us through this crisis?" I almost laughed. Even now, even when their world was crumbling around them, they couldn't conceive of me as anything other than someone they could buy or manipulate. "I want nothing from you, Mrs. Cole. I never have." Brandon's phone rang, and he answered it with shaking hands. "Hello? What? When? Are you sure?" He hung up and turned to his mother, his face white as paper. "That was James. The FBI just raided his office. They're asking questions about our offshore accounts." Patricia's coffee cup slipped from her hands, shattering against the marble floor. And for the first time since I'd known them, both Brandon and his mother looked at me with something that might have been fear. "How did they know about the offshore accounts?" Patricia whispered. I smiled and picked up my purse. "I have no idea, but I'm sure you'll figure it out." The fear in their eyes was intoxicating. For 4 years, I'd watched them look down on me, dismiss me, treat me like an inconvenience they had to tolerate. Now they were staring at me like I was a puzzle they couldn't solve. "Elena," Brandon said slowly, How did you know about offshore accounts? I never mentioned any offshore accounts. I tilted my head, pretending to consider his question. You didn't? Strange. I could have sworn you mentioned them during one of your many phone calls with James. You know how sound carries in this house. Patricia stood up abruptly, her designer heels crunching on the broken porcelain. This is ridiculous. We're wasting time pointing fingers when we should be calling our lawyers. Good idea, I said. Though I should mention that your usual law firm might be unavailable. Something about a conflict of interest. Brandon's face went pale. What do you mean, conflict of interest? Well, it's hard for lawyers to represent you when they're already representing the people providing evidence against you. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear their minds racing, trying to process what I just said. Elena, Brandon's voice was barely a whisper. What people? I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden Brandon was so proud of. You know, it's funny how much you can learn about someone when they think you're not paying attention. 4 years of listening to your phone calls, reading your emails when you left your laptop open, watching you and James celebrate your clever little schemes. You've been spying on me? I turned back to face them. Spying is such an ugly word. I prefer gathering evidence. Patricia sank back into her chair. Evidence of what? Oh, where do I start? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my files. The falsified tax returns? The money laundering through those Cayman Island accounts? The bribes to city officials for those construction permits? Or maybe the embezzlement from your own company's pension fund? Brandon's legs gave out and he collapsed onto the couch. That's impossible. You couldn't have known about any of that. Couldn't I? I sat down across from them, crossing my legs casually. You see, Brandon, you made one crucial mistake. You assumed I was stupid. I never said you were stupid. You didn't have to say it. You showed it every day, leaving confidential documents on your desk where I could see them, taking important calls in front of me because you thought I wouldn't understand, bragging to James about your illegal activities because you assumed your little wife was too simple to follow along. Patricia's voice was shaking. How long have you been gathering this evidence? Since about 6 months after we got married. That's when I realized what kind of man I'd actually married. I smiled at the memory. Do you remember that dinner party where you and James were joking about the creative accounting you were doing for the Morrison project? You thought it was hilarious that you were overcharging them by 30% and hiding the extra money offshore. Brandon's face was gray. You recorded us. I recorded everything. 4 years of conversations, emails, financial documents. I have enough evidence to put both you and James away for 20 years. Why? Patricia's voice cracked. Why would you do this to us? We welcomed you into our family. Welcomed me? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. You've spent 4 years treating me like a charity case, like some pathetic girl who should be grateful for your son's attention. I stood up and walked over to Brandon, who was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. You want to know the truth, Brandon? I'm worth more than your entire family. I've been funding your company through shell corporations for 2 years. Every major contract you thought you won on merit, I arranged it. Every investor who seemed impressed by your business plan, I sent them. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. That's right, I continued. Your nothing wife has been keeping your family business afloat while you played the big shot, and now I'm pulling the plug. Patricia found her voice. You can't do this. We'll fight you. We'll expose you. With what? The evidence I've already given to the FBI? The recordings where you admit to multiple felonies? The financial records that prove everything? I picked up my purse and headed for the door. Oh, and Brandon, those 100 missed calls on my phone this morning? They weren't all from you. Some of them were from reporters who wanted my comment on the story that's breaking tomorrow. I paused at the doorway and looked back at them one last time. You were right about one thing, though. I am nothing without you. I smiled. I'm everything. 6 months later, I stood in my penthouse office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was spectacular. Central Park stretched out below me like a green carpet, and the city hummed with energy and possibility. My assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Martinez, the Forbes reporter is here for your interview. Send her in. I smoothed my tailored blazer and walked over to my desk. The nameplate read, Elena Martinez, CEO, Apex Financial Solutions. No more hiding behind shell companies or fake names. No more pretending to be less than I was. The reporter was a sharp-looking woman in her 30s who clearly knew her business. Ms. Martinez, thank you for agreeing to this interview. Our readers are fascinated by your story. Building a multi-million-dollar investment firm while maintaining complete anonymity for years. It wasn't anonymity, I corrected, settling into my chair. It was strategy. Can you elaborate on that? I smiled, thinking back to that night 6 months ago when Brandon's world finally collapsed completely. Sometimes the best way to win is to let your opponents underestimate you. When people think you're powerless, they show you exactly where their weaknesses are. Speaking of opponents, I understand your ex-husband was recently sentenced? 25 years for embezzlement, money laundering, and tax evasion. His business partner received a similar sentence. I kept my voice neutral, professional. Justice has a way of finding people eventually. What I didn't tell the reporter was how satisfying it had been to watch Brandon's face when the FBI agents walked into our house that morning. How he'd looked at me with complete bewilderment as they read him his rights, still unable to comprehend that his nothing wife had orchestrated his downfall. Patricia had tried to save herself by throwing Brandon under the bus, claiming she knew nothing about the illegal activities. But I'd recorded her too, and the evidence was overwhelming. She'd received 10 years and lost everything. The house, the cars, the jewelry she'd been so proud of. Your company has grown exponentially since going public, the reporter continued. What's next for Apex Financial? We're expanding into international markets. I'm particularly interested in helping women build generational wealth. Women who've been told they're not smart enough, not capable enough, not enough, period. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and couldn't suppress a small smile. Good news? The reporter asked. You could say that. I just acquired another property, a beautiful estate in the Hamptons. It used to belong to the Cole family. I didn't mention that I'd bought it for a fraction of its value at a foreclosure auction, or that I planned to turn it into a retreat center for women entrepreneurs. Brandon's childhood home would become a place where women learned to build their own empires. The interview wrapped up an hour later, and I walked the reporter to the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. Confident, successful, free. My phone rang. It was Carlos. Did you see the news? He asked. Which news? Brandon tried to appeal his sentence. The judge denied it this morning. I walked back to my office and sat down at my desk. On the corner sat a framed photo, not of Brandon, but of my parents. They'd died believing their daughter would never amount to anything, that poverty was her destiny. Elena, you still there? I'm here. Thanks for letting me know. Any regrets? I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret destroying Brandon's life? Did I regret the years of pretending to be someone I wasn't? No, I said finally. No regrets. After I hung up, I opened my laptop and checked my investment portfolio. $47 million and growing. I'd built an empire from nothing, survived a marriage designed to diminish me, and emerged stronger than ever. My assistant knocked again. Ms. Martinez? There's a young woman here who says she has an appointment. She wants to discuss starting her own business, but says she doesn't have any capital. Send her in, I said immediately. Because that's what I did now. I helped women who'd been told they were nothing become everything they were meant to be. Just like I had. The girl who walked into my office was nervous, clutching a worn folder of business plans. She reminded me of myself at her age, hungry, determined, underestimated. Tell me about your idea, I said, gesturing for her to sit down. As she began to speak, her eyes lighting up with passion and possibility, I smiled. This was my real victory. Not just destroying the people who'd tried to destroy me, but building something beautiful from the ashes. Brandon had been wrong about everything, but especially about one thing. I wasn't nothing without him. I was infinite.